Hello, everybody, and welcome to Narrative Live. Over the last few days, I've been talking a lot about the world on the brink. On the brink of world war is what we're suggesting may be happening. And that is why we're bringing back our good friend, Sean Wiswesser, who is a former Central Intelligence Agency station chief, a guy who's been around the block more than once in many a war zone and other places. And he just wrote the book, Tradecraft, Tactics, and Dirty Tricks, Russian Intelligence and Putin's Secret War. There's the cover for everyone to see. If you're at a store, make sure you pick it up. It's published by the Naval Institute Press. And it is out now. It's a good read in terms of understanding exactly how Putin and others are interfering in the midterm elections and are doing so on a geopolitical basis. And we welcome you back to the show. Sean, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Zev. Good to be back with you and your viewers and listeners again. Thanks for having me.
You know, thank you for being here. The last time we spoke about the elections in particular and whether the interference would look like as we head into the polls. But this time, I really want to focus on what's happening geopolitically. Yesterday and the day before, there was an interesting set of circumstances around Kaliningrad, where we have this Suwalki gap, I guess, between Russia's ownership of Kaliningrad and Belarus's, which is, of course, is a Russian military sort of area. And in between there's Lithuania and Poland, NATO territory. And there was a lot of NATO activity over there in the last 48 hours. No one is really sure why. There is some fear, I guess, that we could see Russia provocatively attack either Lithuania or Poland or try reclaim that gap, or they might go elsewhere. They've been swarming parts of Russia, I mean, parts of Romania, parts of Poland as well. So, you know, how real is this threat that something like this could happen in the coming days or weeks as we head in towards the elections?
Well, the threat is very real, Zev. I'm glad that you're bringing attention to it. One of our fellow Substackers, Olga Lautman, is doing some excellent reporting recently on this. I think you've seen some of that. Yeah, Olga's. Yep, she's doing some great reporting on it. I just mentioned to her I would mention her name and reporting. Hope some of your viewers will check it out. Listen, I know a lot about Lithuania. My wife's Lithuanian. Okay, I served there, served at the embassy there. Know the country very well. The great people of Lithuania. They know the threat is very real. Their country was occupied by two different despotic powers, unfortunately, the Soviet Union and Nazi Germany, and they suffered horribly through that oppression. They had hundreds of thousands of the Baltic peoples were deported. Tens of thousands died in Siberian gulag camps, men, women, and children. The threat's real for them. It's part of their history. You know, when I travel there with my own sons, I make sure that they understand that tortured past literally took them to all of the memorials to the victims of both the Nazis and the Soviet oppressors. And so it's no wonder that they're very concerned about Russia potentially acting. Look at what Russia's done so far, Zev. We have regular drone and now missile incursions on the Baltics and Poland and Romania, cable cuts in the Baltic Sea, assassinations against officials, attempted assassination against the CEO of Rheinmetall in Germany. So all of this gray zone warfare, hybrid warfare. Why is this important? As I discuss in my book, and thank you for highlighting my book with Naval Institute Press, I talk about Russian intelligence and Putin's secret war, the subtitle of the book. Well, Putin's secret war led up, of course, to both the invasions of Georgia in 2008 and the Ukrainian invasion of 2014. A lot of folks forget this war in Ukraine has been going on since 2014 when Putin invaded using gray tactics, calling little green troops that were GRU, Spetsnaz, and other regular military units that took over Crimea and the Donbass. The full-scale invasion then in 2022. It's a playbook that we know, Zev, but not enough attention is being paid to it. So I'm glad for the chance to talk about it. Let's talk geography a little bit. So remember that the Kaliningrad enclave was formerly Königsberg in World War II. The Soviets fought for that territory. They took it over after World War II. They just seized it. It became part of the Soviet Union. You're left with the way the geography is strangely put together there. You're left with a tiny piece of land between what is Russian Kaliningrad, the enclave as they call it, and Belarus, which we all know is essentially a territory just occupied by Russia, and its dictator Lukashenko does exactly what Russia wants him to do. So that tiny sliver of land you have in red there, it's very dangerous that Russia might think about essentially cutting off all three of the rest of the Baltics and seizing what we call the Suwalki gap or that corridor, trying to establish a land bridge to Kaliningrad. I believe, unfortunately, Zev, I believe it's high on Putin's priority list. He's never gotten over, in his mind, losing the Baltic states when they chose their independence, when they heroically stood against Soviet oppression, and some of their citizens died for it, including 13 at the TV tower in Lithuania in 1991. So that, in brief, is what the struggle's about, Zev, why the Baltic peoples are concerned, and we're unfortunately distracted some in the West. We have other priorities, other things going on. Putin may decide, geez, this is my chance.
Yeah, he may. However, it seems so unlikely because, well, at least on the face of it, it seems unlikely because he's having such a hard time defeating Ukraine. Does he have the resources? Does he have the will to start another front, as it were, with the NATO countries? Is there even that kind of incentive for him to do that? Will these people even accept another front?
Well, most military experts in Europe and in the United States, most are saying that Russia would need time to, quote, reconstitute after the Ukraine war, that they're not strong enough yet to make a move against NATO. However, Zev, those same experts said that they thought Russia would need until 2030. Now most estimates are saying as soon as 2028, potentially Russia may be ready to move. The other thing we need to consider, I've written a lot about the Ukraine war. I've been publishing a book with Army War College called Call to Action in 2024 about the first lessons we learned from the war. Then I was in a major book with a Cambridge publishing house. The book was called Air War in Ukraine, the First Year of Conflict, with Justin Bronk and another number of other really well-known experts, Mike Kaufman and others. I had chapter 2 in that book. As we discussed in that book, Zev, the first year or two of the war was about Russian failures, air power failures, and other military failures. The last 2 years plus of the war have been about Russian adaptation. They've adapted remarkably well. They stood up an entire new drone division to their military, their armed forces, the unmanned systems troops. They've developed units like Rubicon, which is a specialized drone warfare unit. NATO doesn't have anything like it. And so my worry, Zev, has always been, and I've written about this quite a bit in my column pieces in Cipher Brief and Tomorrow's Affairs, I keep saying, listen, Ukraine is ahead of Russia. Thank goodness. Thank God Ukraine is ahead of Russia with drone warfare, with electronic warfare. But Russia's ahead of NATO, and dramatically so, in fighting this new type of warfare. So would they act potentially against a small sliver of land with NATO at a time that they see opportune to them? Maybe. Putin's living in a bunker mentality too, Zev. We have to worry about that as well. He's not making rational decisions, is he?
No, he isn't. By the way, if you're watching this and you're seeing the wrong title, it says Beneath Zorro. That's our next show at 1 p.m. I guess our computer got it mixed up. So we're talking about our special report, World on the Brink now, not on our Zorro report, which is coming up next. I apologize for everyone watching if you're getting confused by why Sean Wiswesser is here. He's a CIA station chief, former station chief for the CIA, and it's great to have his expertise here as we discuss the geopolitics of what is going on in the world right now. Now, militarily, you point out that Putin is in disarray. On the other hand, he's just launched, if I'm not mistaken, 2 new the submarine that he just launched, the Poseidon, I think it's called, or something like that, is a very powerful nuclear armed submarine. And then he's also got this new vessel. I'm not sure if I'm recalling the name right now, but this new naval vessel that's also reportedly sort of what they're describing as sort of a dystopian kind of a military vehicle. What are these things? What are these things that they're putting out there, and what are and that Russia now has in its possession that are stronger than anything the West has, and could cause real changes in the way we prepare for a military incursion or attack by Russia?
Yeah, there's a number of, so we can't underestimate, Zev. The Russians can be bungling at times. They can be incompetent. I talk about in my book all sorts of drunken nonsense I experienced and witnessed with Russian intelligence officers over my career. However, they're formidable adversaries. Why? Because technologically, scientifically, back to the days of the Soviet Union, they have good scientists. They have good researchers. They come up with innovations, and they've done that throughout the Ukraine war. They have entire classes of weapons they're developing. They're long-range strike weapons and things that we're not we either gave up on the designs because they wouldn't work. For instance, a nuclear-powered cruise missile that the Russians are developing. I believe that the Russian word for it is Budovyesnik, which is like a seabird, type of seabird. That's one of the classes of weapons. There's other long-range ballistic missiles that they're developing, hypersonic weapons. Most of them are not in deployable stages yet. They're still in the development stages, and they lack Sometimes they lack the funding. Sometimes they lack the resources to continue to develop them. But it needs to be said, they come up with really innovative designs. Let me highlight one really special type of innovation they have that we don't have, Zev. They have a special submarine. It's an Oscar II stretch sub, it's called. And it's got a mini sub attached to it called the Loshotic. And what they use this for is to be prepared to cut the undersea cables between Europe and the United States if war breaks out. And they've been using this Oscar II stretch club. I believe the name is Belgorod, after one of the major Russian cities on the border with Ukraine. They've been probing in NATO waters. They've been probing off the UK coast along with its sister ship, which is above the surface, called the Yantar. So we should be paying attention when the Russians are off the British sea coast, off the Cornish coast of the UK, and this ship, the Yantar, which is from a special directorate called the Directorate for Underwater Sea Research. It's called GUJI in Russian. So when they're probing and they have a submarine with a mini sub equipped with special divers able to cut cables, does that tell you about Russia's preparedness for potential war with the United States and NATO? That's the lengths that they're going to, Zev. So I am concerned. The Yantar, by the way, I highlighted in my book, for years now, they've been constantly challenged by NATO warships, by the UK, by the US off the coast because they're mapping our cables. And now they have a submarine capable of actually cutting those cables with a mini sub and divers that can do it. These are preparations for war.
Yeah, these are preparations for war. I mean, we're looking at Russia being very aggressive with Romania in particular. There's these drones attacks. There was an incident in Leipzig you've been speaking about as well. This is the Leipzig airport where there's a big NATO refueling station, I guess, where there were a drone with explosives on board the drone that was almost detonated near an aircraft that would have contained a lot of ammunition. Or a warehouse.
Let's talk about that, Zev.
I mean, these are very serious provocations. This is Germany now.
This is serious. This is unprecedented provocation. Let's talk about the Leipzig drone incident. I had a guest commentary piece for the Kiev Post, and I appreciate them publishing it last week. I wrote for Tomorrow's Affairs in the UK, and then the Kiev Post reposted my article. I entitled it "The Danger of Empty Deterrence," the Leipzig drone incident. Empty deterrence, Zev. What is NATO's reaction? What's the United States' reaction? Leipzig is a major NATO hub. It's a major NATO logistics hub. The Russians flew one drone that apparently crashed into a plane, and then another drone, armed drone, that they landed next to the Antonov Ukrainian terminal there, cargo terminal. They're sending a message to NATO. They're trying to say, hey, we can detonate this thing anytime we want. Your air defenses are hollow. They're trying to show and provoke NATO, saying we can do whatever we want anytime we want. We could have set off that drone and destroyed an aircraft. It's not the first time, Zev. I think you and I talked some on the last time I was on your show a few weeks back. What about the parcel bomb plot that the GRU carried out in 2024 and 2025? Putting explosives on planes. They blew up an airliner in Lithuania. It got far too little attention in the United States. Blew up an airliner, DHL airliner, at the airport in Lithuania. Same country we're talking about now with the Suwalki Gap. But what else did they do? The other part of that, the New York Times reported on, the GRU put explosive packages, minus the explosives, they put the packages on planes to the United States. That's terrorism, Zev. When Al-Qaeda did that, we went to war because of airline plots. The GRU did it, and we got precious little attention in the United States. We didn't respond at all. I made the point in the editorial piece for the Kiev Post. What would President Ronald Reagan have done if the KGB in Soviet times put parcel bombs on planes in Europe and then put packages on the U.S. to test it? Missiles would be flying, Zev. There'd be a reaction from the United States to show the Soviet Union we're not going to tolerate that type of escalation. But unfortunately, the Russians continue because we have empty deterrence right now. We're not responding as an alliance, and the United States in particular. We're not leading a response against Russia's escalation.
This is really the thing. I mean, everyone might be thinking, well, this is an ocean away and a continent away. Why should I really care if Lithuania gets attacked? And of course, the answer is it's NATO. We have to respond. We will need to respond, and we aren't sure at this point if the commitment to NATO, if the alliance is as strong as it used to be. And that is a real issue as we see all of the drawdown of American troops on the border there and in other parts of the world. And I want to zoom out a little bit because we talked a lot about Eastern Europe and what Russia may do, and that's one threat. But now if we zoom out more and we look at what's going on in the Pacific, in the last few days, we've seen enormous changes to the American position in the Pacific. We've had the only aircraft carrier removed from the region, and we've had a drawdown of American troops in involvement in exercises, in military exercises in South Korea, with a fairly unusual statement from the President of the United States declaring that this is a friendship thing between him and Kim Jong-un, although Kim Jong-un today denied that he's ever had anything to do with any of this at all. But nevertheless, we've seen, America seems, a little bit more exposed, a lot more exposed in the Pacific. We don't really have as much of a defensive posture there as we used to. This is obviously going to give Xi Jinping, enough of a moment, or could give him enough of a moment to take his chance on Taiwan, which is what he's been wanting to do for a long time. That presents another front. So talk about that.
Of course. Yeah, Zev, I wrote a piece for Cypher Brief a couple months ago. I titled the piece "The Bear and the Dragon: The Danger of Sino-Russian Opportunism." Look, they're not in alliance like we have. NATO is the very envy of China and Russia. They don't have anything like it, Zev. The reality is they're not in alliance. But, however, the big point of my piece was opportunism. They don't need to be allied to say, you know what, this is the time for Xi Jinping to say, you know what, United States interceptor stocks are historically low. Putin's escalating his hybrid war in Europe. NATO's firmly focused on him. And now we have this sort of crazy, I don't know what to call it, about why would we stand down exercises with South Korea, a staunch ally of the United States? I don't fundamentally understand it. It's the commander-in-chief's prerogative. He's my president. I believe every president has the right to make foreign policy and make those decisions. But I fundamentally don't understand it, Zev. I have to say, I looked at that one. I said, wait a second. What is the North Korean dictator done to earn de-escalation from our side? He hasn't done anything. He hasn't made any steps for us to say, yeah, you know what? We're making firm steps forward. Let's go ahead and scale back our exercises with the staunch ally. This is a time when we need to be projecting to China, North Korea, and Russia, all of them, to be projecting that we're ready to deter. We, as allied with our partners like South Korea and Japan, we're ready to deter Chinese aggression in the Taiwan Strait, North Korean aggression against South Korea. Instead, we're standing down on exercises. I don't understand it, Zeb. I worry about China in particular.
There was also a response today, by the way. I think the North Koreans actually launched 10 missiles today. Which is again, giving them permission to do that.
What's the Hermit Kingdom and its dictator done? The Rocket Man. What has he done to earn this level of trust from the United States? I don't get it. I worry about China too, Zev. Xi Jinping publicly has made the statement over and over, told his generals that by 2027 they need to be ready to unite Taiwan with the mainland by force if necessary. So that's what, 6 months off? Less now.
Yeah.
And now you have, unfortunately, I don't know how much truth is in it. I hope it's not true, but you see a lot of the media reporting, a lot of the leaks supposedly about low interceptor stocks. Well, it's no wonder though. We've been engaged in a war with Iran now. We've been using up those stocks, so have our allies. Could this be the moment again where China says opportunistically, we're never going to have a better moment to move against Taiwan? Now is our time. Maybe we should do it. All of these purges in China, Zeb, we touched on this a little bit the last time I was on. We don't know fundamentally what they mean. Does it mean that Xi is upset with the generals for not moving fast enough on Taiwan? Or does it mean he thinks they're moving too quickly? We don't know, honestly. I hope my old agency knows. I hope CIA is on top of it. But it is a scary time, Zev.
These are very scary times. I want to talk a little bit more about Iran because you've now made. We covered the Eastern European section. Sure. We've now covered the Pacific, another potential front that America would have to defend or might not defend, depending on the position they are in. But then you've got the Iran situation, which is turning into quite a quagmire. I mean, even if it's not killing, thousands and thousands of Americans, it's depleting our military assets. It's creating this almost a mutiny-like situation on the Lincoln, and we're seeing to be hurriedly moving our resources around the world in order to defend against these sort of these sort of tactical things that are problematic, and that we don't have a supply chain or whatever. But we seem to be at least transmitting to the world that there's some difficulty in the American posture. So that's not going away anytime soon. It looks like we're in this Iranian battle of will for a period of time now. We're not going to see us drawing down. We're not going to see them stepping back either.
Well, Zev, fundamentally, again, I try not to do policy. That's the commander-in-chief's, and that's also Congress's responsibility to keep the commander-in-chief in line with what the American people want. Was Iran a necessary war or not? Again, I'll leave that to the politicians. But we're in a hell of a pickle right now, aren't we, Zev? We're in a hell of a pickle right now with Iran.
Yeah.
So we had this. I'm writing a piece for Tomorrow's Affairs next week out in the UK. Hope some of your viewers will read it, about the limits of air power. Isn't the United States now challenged, understanding that there are limits, in fact, to what air power can accomplish in the 21st century? For a long time, America got used to the idea we were the world's preeminent air power, and we could enforce our will on our adversaries. And rightly so, when we needed to, we could enforce a hell of a beating on our adversaries based on air power. But the paradigm has changed fundamentally, Zev. The piece I'm putting out next week in Tomorrow's Affairs is about this. Look at what the United States and Israel were able to do to air defenses in Iran. We took out their entire air defense system. The Israelis did it even before we went to war last year. We participated in Midnight Hammer, but before that, in 4 days, they took out their defense system. Most military analysts, based on our previous wars, Persian Gulf War, Iraq War II, said, okay, well, that's it. War over, right? Done. Sorry, not so. Iran has different ideas. They say, you know what? We've stockpiled thousands of missiles. We've got thousands or tens of thousands of more drones. They can hit back, and they did hit back at our bases in the Middle East. They hit back against critical supply bases like in Bahrain. That's why the Lincoln that you mentioned now can't do a port call, can't go to Bahrain because the Iranians successfully attacked it. The Iranians are showing, unfortunately, the dangers now of asymmetric warfare, what they're able to do with drones and missiles. They don't need carriers. They don't need an air force to go against us. There's limits to what our air power can inflict on an adversary determined to continue fighting, Zev. They don't care about how much suffering is inflicted on their people. There's analogies here to Russia, and I've written about that as well. What have the Iranians learned from Russia 4 years at war? Maybe it's that they can stick it out. It's a horrible thing to say. I wish it wouldn't be so, but the Iranians are not giving up, unfortunately. So we're in a hell of a pickle.
Not only not giving up, they're talking about being offensive. And we're not really sure what that means, but they're talking about it going on offense around the world against American targets. We're not quite sure which targets, no one can tell, but certainly economic interests around the world is one of the things that they've mentioned. It could also mean going on offense in the United States as well. It could be domestic cells that are suddenly lit up and doing things in the United States. They've certainly made threats like that in the past. This world that we're looking at could easily be not only three fronts, it could also be something happening on the domestic front as well, which would force America into engaging on all these fronts. Because at the end of the day, we're still talking about one kind of alliance. If you're not, you may not call it an alliance in the same way that I talk about NATO, but China, Russia, Iran have been aligned on many things for a long time, and they continue to be supportive of each other. We see Chinese arms making their way to Iran. We see Russian arms helping the Iranians. We see them giving strategic and satellite information to the Iranians as well on both sides. In fact, targeting some of those bases we've been talking about. This is, George Bush called it the axis of evil. It's still the same axis. You might choose a different name, but it's still there.
Yep, of course it is.
And that's who we're fighting against. If there's an attack on America, that's who we'll be fighting against at the end of the day. Are we in any way prepared for that kind of attack with this modern warfare like drones, which we're not really equipped for? How can we handle this?
Well, Zev, there is a ray of light here. I don't want to be all pessimistic. I do believe that America still has the strongest military in the world. We're blessed with the best pilots in the world. I went to Air War College, graduated several years ago, got my master's at Air War College. 80% of my class were pilots. Most of them were U.S. Air Force pilots. Some of the best men and women I've ever met, privileged to serve with in my career, my time at Air War College. So we're blessed with great servicemen and women, Zev. We have the best fighters. We have the best equipment in the world. But this war is evolving both in Ukraine and Iran. It's a new type of warfare that we're just not prepared for yet. We're not prepared for drone warfare. We're not prepared for one-way attack UAVs. You saw it with Iran's strikes back in the Middle East in April. We're trying to use $2 million Patriot interceptors to take down $30,000 or $40,000 Shahed drones from Iran. We're just not prepared for this. The Ukrainians, ironically, tried to help us and have been trying to give us their experience. They are prepared. They know how to deal with it. A lot of the Gulf states now have gone directly to Ukraine saying, hey, we need your help, and they're using Ukrainian help. I wrote, December of last year, I wrote a column piece for the Cipher Brief. I called it Echoes of 1940, what we can learn from an ally at war. We should be learning from the Ukrainians. We should have been drawing on their experience all this time. We're not investing enough resources into both helping Ukraine, but learning from their experiences while they're at war. That's what the Russians and Ukrainians are doing, Zev. They may not be strategic allies formally. They don't have a treaty, but they're learning from each other at war. And that's the scary part. They're evolving together at war. The Iranians gave the Russians Shahed drones. The Russians innovated, adapted them. They now call them Girlan drones, and they've made them even better. So I worry that, yeah, we're even with the best servicemen and women in the world, with the best pilots, the best aircraft, the best high dollar systems, this asymmetric war that you see playing out in the Gulf right now, what's specifically happening? Zev, as you probably know, there's a northern route in the Strait of Hormuz that the Iranians are saying, hey, this is ours now. So we're definitely no better off than before the war started. Before the war, the strait wasn't divided. Now the Iranians have effective control over the northern part of the strait, saying, this is where our missiles and drones can reach. Nobody's going to dare go through here. There's a southern part of the strait that, according to recent reporting, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and others say U.S. ships are escorting some of the ships through, and we're able to get some oil out. So now we only have half of the Strait of Hormuz. How the hell are we better off than we were before, Zev? I go back to the Powell Doctrine. Secretary of State Powell, Colin Powell, great American, great general, and a great statesman as Secretary of State. The Powell Doctrine was we use U.S. force as sparingly as possible. Again, it's the prerogative of the commander-in-chief. It's President Trump's decision. But the Powell Doctrine dictated, and I believe in it, if we're going to use force, we use overwhelming force and we get the war done as quickly as possible. We be clear on our objectives, what we're trying to accomplish. Where are we right now with Iran? I'm not sure, Zev. I'm kind of lost on this one. What were we trying to accomplish, and what did we accomplish? Now we've got a divided Strait of Hormuz we didn't have before. Not a good situation.
Like Oman is saying that divided strait, the lower part now belongs to them in the latest deal, and America can use it. But Oman used to be our ally, and now we're even talking about bombing Oman, which is unbelievable in the context of where we are. But what you're saying is very true, that there is a lot of misunderstanding or no clear goals setting around what should happen in Iran. But all of it together is what keeps me up at night. All of it together worries me, because we can fight one war and be in Iran for probably a significant amount of time, just a blockade. But can we do this? Can we protect Taiwan? Do we still want to protect Taiwan? Is that something we're willing to just give up? Are we going to try extract anything for not helping Taiwan? Are the Taiwanese going to be okay with that? And at the same time, as we look at NATO in Eastern Europe, these are important allies. Lithuania, Poland, these are important allies. We can't just jettison them at the first strike by Russia, which may happen in some cases if the president isn't wanting to engage. And so all of that together, and then the domestic threat is worrying as hell. It's what would you say right now to them?
Zev, we need allies more than ever right now. Again, it'll be in my piece that I'm publishing next week on air power, the limits of air power. How do we answer it? What's the solution? It's allies. As you just said, Zev, you put it very well, very eloquent. We need our allies now more than ever. We can't possibly stand up to potential Chinese aggression in the Strait without Japan and South Korea. We need them. Okay, we need our allies in that region and others in that region that we need. The Philippines, by the way, are constantly subjected to Chinese pressure and Chinese tactics in the South China Sea. We need our allies there. We need our allies in Europe more than ever, and they need us, by the way. The U.S. isn't all to blame, by the way, when it comes to interceptor stocks and whatnot. The Europeans, Rusi put out a great piece by Jack Watling, wrote a piece also, an opinion piece, not unlike mine, different points of view on deterrence. I wrote in the Kiev Post about empty deterrence. Jack Watling pointed out Europe should have seen this interceptor crisis coming. They could have invested better in defense. They should have seen the threat from Russia coming. For years and years, they were too dependent on the United States. I believe President Trump is right about that. Europe could have been doing a lot more. They need to do more now. They need to desperately feel, I'm sorry to say, the noose around their necks from Russia. This is a dictator hell-bent on aggression, Zev. He's shown that he doesn't care how many millions of his people die. Really, 1.5 million casualties now. Putin doesn't care. They don't mean anything to him. He wants to rewrite the map, and he's also got these crazy ideas about living forever. He was caught on the air with that. Remember his comments when he was visiting Xi Jinping, talking about organ transplant he's into and all. This is crazy, crazy stuff. But so Putin believes he's going to live forever, and he's got ambitions to rewrite the map of Europe. And so we need the best way that we can show that we're ready to deter aggression is that we stand together as allies. We stand united. So I am confused. I got to admit, I'm confused. Why in the world would we stand down on exercises with our South Korean allies? Why in the world would the United States ever backtrack from commitments to our NATO allies? 80 years that alliance has stood through a lot of difficulty. Zeb, I do think there's a ray of light that I think there's still strong support in a lot of parts of this administration, parts of Congress. Lindsey Graham, may he rest in peace, was a strong advocate for Ukraine. His sanctions bill was pushed through Congress. So I do have hope. There is hope, I think, of those that get the threat. And again, I'm just confused by a lot of what I'm seeing out there, Zeb. Doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, now that there's a tariff war in the middle of all of this with Canada, which is now, leading the world in some regards, in terms of our alliances with Europe. Like, it just doesn't add up. And yet here we are. So without, I know you're trying to avoid politics and policy, but there's some times when the president might be on a different track than everybody else. There's just that happens. In this case, the majority of Americans, I think, would view these actions as provocative and dangerous, and he might not. What happens in that situation? And I know you don't want to question him, but
no, it's okay.
How do we get around that?
Here's what I'll say. I've always tried to stay apolitical. My career with CIA, Zeb, I try to now. Here's what you've heard me say many times. It's prerogative of the commander-in-chief to determine foreign policy, but not without checks and balances. So we have an election coming up, thankfully. We have an election. The midterms are coming up. The American people have the chance. Thank God that our men and women, soldiers in uniform, those who served out of uniform, I'm honored. I served in Afghanistan together with special forces troops I was embedded to. I know what it looks like to live in dictatorships with absolutely no democracy and no chance of democracy. I served overseas for over a dozen years of my life. I mentioned my wife's family living under oppression in the former Soviet Union. Americans, please vote. For God's sake, the best thing that you can do as a tribute to the American heroic veterans, men and women that have served and those that died for our country and our freedoms is go vote. Make your voice known. Hold your congressman account. The one strange paradigm we have right now, Zev, is don't see Congress very actively keeping in its role as a check, as one of the third pillars of our Constitution and our form of government. We need to have a Supreme Court that helps keep things in check, make sure that the laws, that we're strictly looking at what the laws are. We have a Congress that should write the laws and keep the executive branch in check. And then it's the president's prerogative, again, to determine foreign policy and defense policy, a number of issues, but not without checks and balances from the Congress. So it's American people's chance here in a few months, Zeb. I know you're counting down to the election.
Yeah,
and let's talk about our adversaries, by the way.
Yeah,
let's talk about our adversaries real quick. All I want to say, and we can talk more on this if you want, like we did last time, Zeb. We've got the Russians and Chinese more than happy to meddle in our elections and make Americans think it's not worth voting. So I hope to God people will vote in November and make their voice.
It's interesting. There was a concern expressed by states, cyber experts, that there was a vulnerability in this coming elections, because normally they'd be given a lot of federal assistance in terms of cyber attacks on the election infrastructure. They're warning now that they haven't received any help from the federal government in terms of creating a hardened network for the election infrastructure, for ensuring that there's no backdoor access to some of this infrastructure. And I know that this is part of what Russia and China would want to do, is project uncertainty around the results. But this is also a real concern being stressed by the U.S. states who are most at risk of election interference from a digital hacking point of view.
Yeah, it is concerning, Zev. This is a time we should be investing in election infrastructure. We should be investing in the states. I don't know how you feel about it, but I do trust the states to carry out free and fair elections. They're actually, you ever go to the polls and see what type of great Americans we have? A lot of them are elderly volunteers of both parties. They're not going to have anybody screw with their local elections at those polling places have all over the country. These are Americans that believe fundamentally in free and fair elections. And the fact that they were unfortunately defamed as some of the attacks that have happened against election workers, I think is a horrible, horrible crime and disservice to our democracy. I do believe that more can be done and should be done, Zev. Let's remember, you just stated something very important. It's not really a matter of penetrating election systems as much as our adversaries giving the hint that they've been penetrated or trying to suggest and be able to prove or there's been some type of problem, infraction, leak. That undermines the entire system. That's what the Russians want. That's the nonsense over the Venezuelan voting machines that was put out there, and the Russians amplified with their active measures, with their information warfare. Former Attorney General Barr said, it's bullshit, his words. It's bullshit. Venezuelan voting machines. That's ridiculous. There were none. There were none compromised. Those damn Venezuelans. There they go again.
They're always at it. They always come at it.
But that's the point, Zev. It's the rumor. The rumor
Yeah.
continues. The rumor is promulgated and put forth by our adversaries to try to get Americans to believe, hey, don't bother voting. It doesn't matter. We don't want you to actually have free and fair elections because we don't have them in Russia and they certainly don't have them in China. So, yeah, I hope Americans will vote.
I hope Americans vote too, and I'm sure they will. And I'm sure this will be a result. Hopefully, there'll be a result that if the polls are true, that reflect the will of the people to confront, the current policy structure that we have. But I want to have a more frank conversation with you about what happens if that doesn't succeed. Like, what if we don't get an election because we've started a war, or there's a war that's now brewing around the world, and there's a martial law or whatever it is that could be declared in the event of a conflict? Because that is this period of time we're looking at right now. Many people are expressing some concern that some sort of provocative action around the world will give the president a reason to say we're not holding these elections. Is that even gameable? I can't see a way that actually happens, by the way. I've looked at this a million ways. I don't see how the laws allow for that. It just doesn't. But
no, we live in strange times. I also don't believe that's a reality at all. Look at you. We're not the only democracy, though, where these issues come up. Look at Ukraine right now, a country at war, struggling with whether to have elections or not. Their former Minister of Defense, Fedorov, just said he believes they should have elections. He obviously probably wants to run against Zelensky. Here's what I would say, Zev. Again, we have a form of government. Our founding fathers put together quite a unique form of government 250 years ago this very year. But it relies on checks and balances. When President Nixon got out of control, when he had lost all sense of sort of reality and the constraints on the executive branch of government, that famous night of, what they call it, it was the night when he was firing one attorney general after another until he wanted to get the result he did.
The Saturday Night Massacre.
Yes, Saturday Night Massacre. So finally, what stopped Nixon? Remember, it was the famous meeting where Barry Goldwater went to the White House. And Nixon famously said to him, Senator Goldwater, how many votes do you think we have in the Senate? And he said, Mr. President, I believe you have 3 votes, and I am not one of them. And that was it. Nixon realized, my gosh, I don't even have Goldwater anymore. I've lost
and the low watermark of Nixon's polling was 25%. And we're we're not far off from that right now. This president is polling at 33%.
My point being is there has to be checks and balances. Wherever your persuasion is in government, whether you're left-leaning, right-leaning, Democrat, Republican, vote and hold your elected leaders accountable and make sure that they do stand for the system we set up. We're not an autocratic system. I believe we won't ever be. I don't believe there's any chance we could ever have our elections canceled. I believe there's enough senators and congressmen, I hope and believe with integrity, they would say, no way in hell that's ever going to happen in the United States of America. That's not what our brave servicemen and women died for, preserving our freedoms. But it is something Americans are talking about. It's something they're talking about for sure.
Well, what's at stake here, just to remind everyone, is a values-based world order. We've had alliances around the world that have led the world into remarkable opportunity, remarkable liberalization of our human rights around the world. People have been overall in the last 80 years benefited dramatically from the values-based system that America has led around the world. America's century was a remarkable century. It's not one that we want to see be relabeled as the Chinese century or the Russian century, I think you may have written. And yet here we are facing that very moment, the sort of Damocles sort of hanging over our neck, and we're potentially entering that era where we could see the values-based system, the system that's about justice and equality and human rights around the world, be taken over by a despotic, autocratic rulers like we see in Russia and in China. That'd be a tragedy that is too hard to even contemplate, never mind communicate. It's so sad to imagine all the progress we've made in the last 80 years be thrown away, and what darkness may come from a new world order. But that is where we're at, and people need to sort of frame themselves in that context and understand that this is not about domestic policy issues as much as it is about affordability and all those other things. It's important. But the big picture that everyone should be carrying into this election and beyond is about democracy and about the idea and the values of the American experiment has given the world, and it's been remarkable. I mean, when you look at over 250 years, America's given the world enormous growth and success, and you become a more humane, caring world. To see that go away would be devastating.
You said it very well. You said it very eloquently. Thank you for mentioning one of my pieces when I talked about that piece I wrote about Russia, Sino-Russian opportunism. Thank you for being a reader of it. I said, this is about, what is this century going to be known as? The American century, the 20th century as the American century, was because of the rights that we stood for. The liberal-based world law-based order. Liberal not being liberal versus conservative like Americans think about it, but liberal value-based system, believing in the human rights. That's what America brought to the 20th century. I'll tell a little story if I could, just for 1 or 2 minutes. I also hope that Americans realize there's a lot of people that are serving and do serve for the right reasons. When I retired from CIA a couple years ago, I found a document. I'd written a will when I was a young officer before I served in Afghanistan. We're encouraged to write wills. Tell your family what you want them to know. And I wrote in my will, I took a quote from advisor to President Kennedy. I think it was McGeorge Bundy. And he said, I believe in the rights of a single individual to determine their path in this world. I believe fundamentally in human rights. I believe in value-based order. These things are worth my life and more. That's what I put in my will as a young CIA officer. These things are worth my life and more. That's why I went to Afghanistan, to serve my country and risk my country. And tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of others in and out of uniform did it in the war zones and still are willing to serve. So that's what America's about, Zev. That's the law-based order that we're about an individual, single person's human rights are worth our lives. So I share that because I share that conviction with you. That's what makes America special. It's what I served for 30 years in government and the intelligence community for that. That's what I believe.
And we know that so many other people in the service right now, and I want to thank you for your service as well. But everybody should know that there are many people as committed to those values and those freedoms in service right now, and are going to uphold that world order. And we have to be so thankful for the service you and others have given America and the world, because it really has changed the world. And it is something that is, as bold as it is to say, it's something that's worth dying for. And I think that Americans realize that as we watch things turn, very dangerously into a different direction, and no one wants to see that. So I thank you again for that beautiful story, and thank you for sharing it with our audience here today. It's really an honor to have you on Narrative Live, Sean. Sean Wiswesser is a former chief of station at the CIA. He's been out of the CIA for a couple of years now, and he also writes the book, which I've got on the screen now, Tradecraft, Tactics, and Dirty Tricks, Russian Intelligence and Putin's Secret War. I'll include it again, as I did last time, in the write-up below this video if you're watching after the fact. And everyone should pick it up, but also wherever you can find Sean's writing in various publications, and also on Substack. There's a subscribe button. It's not streaming on your site, I just noticed. I guess I'll give it to you next. But you'll have it on your site in the next. Yeah,
thank you.
But subscribe to Sean Wiswesser. Substack is fairly new on Substack. It's why we're bringing so much attention to him here on Narrative. We really want people to follow him and subscribe to him, because he really understands what's going on inside the intelligence community, and he understands the actual tradecraft, the actual way Moscow works, and that is so important in terms of understanding what's happening in the world right now. So I want to thank you for your time. Again, thanks for being here. I know you're a busy guy. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Zev. Another great discussion with you. Really important issues to us both. So you're very eloquent in stating your views. So we don't agree on everything, but we agree on a lot. We agree on the important things, and we as Americans need to stand united against our adversaries. Thanks for having me on. Thanks for mentioning my book. And you can find me on X at Wiswesser as well. And I have 2 columns that I write. I write a piece in the Cipher Brief pretty regularly, and I also write in Tomorrow's Affairs in the UK. I'll have that piece out next week on Air Power. So thank you so much, Zev. It was an honor again. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Thanks so much, Sean Wiswesser. And stay tuned, everybody. In about 10 minutes from now, we'll be back with another conversation about Zorro Ranch, and we shall see you then. Thanks very much, Sean. We'll do this again, hopefully in the near future.